Mm-hmm.
I mean, now is the first time we've been apart since high school, and I just.
Emily.
VHS is a found footage horror anthology set that looks at the trend of found footage movies and goes, what if we did that? But 6 times. Started by the guys over at Bloody Disgusting, VHS uses the technique of taking a bunch of trusted filmmakers and essentially giving them free rein to create their own individual horror short that would be completely separate from the others but still be woven into the overall fabric of the story. The overall story being a bunch of degenerates doing a bunch of degenerate things. A criminal gang known for various different criminal activities, such as breaking windows and light fixtures. I know, really hardcore stuff. Are hired by an anonymous source to break into someone's house to steal a specific VHS tape. Probably someone's misplaced fetish video that they really don't want getting out of there. After establishing just how truly reprehensible these characters are, by showing them recording themselves assaulting a woman in public to sell the footage, filming romantic partners without their consent, and smashing up abandoned buildings like a 14-year-old boy named Kyle, whose mom just cut him off from his Monster Energy supply. They break into a house to then discover the corpse of an old man sitting in front of several televisions. Because what's better than watching TV? Watching 4 TVs. And as this bunch of criminal masterminds not only record themselves committing a crime, they neglect to wear gloves, leaving fingerprints all over a crime scene that just happens to contain an old dead dude. In other words, not a good look. One of the men is left in the room with the body as the others head off looking for the tape, and he decides to sit down on the floor right in front of the rotting corpse behind him, like a 6-year-old sitting down to watch the Saturday morning cartoons with their dad sitting right behind them. Just this time with a lot less belt whipping. And as he does, Amateur Night, directed by David Buckner, begins to play. Why is it called Amateur Night, you ask? Well, a group of friends, Shane and Patrick, get their buddy Clint to put on a pair of spy glasses to record themselves going out, getting drunk, and bringing hot chicks home to play a nice friendly game of Monopoly. And Patrick just happens to be the most annoying, obnoxious frat bro you could ever possibly imagine. Could you please just, not do that, Patrick? After heading out to a few bars, Clint's approached by a woman who looks as if the few grams of mushrooms she downed earlier have just kicked in full force, and she doesn't seem to quite recognize what planet she's on anymore. She tells him that she likes him, and Clint, apparently being the fan of the clearly mentally absent types that look like they could probably use some help, has her tag along as annoying drunk frat bro gets kicked out of the bar before proceeding to annoyingly drive drunk back to their motel room for the night. Once they get back to the room, Clint mentally prepares himself by repeatedly spitting into the bathroom sink for some reason, because I guess he just really hates sinks. And when he heads back into the room, he sits with the girl as she then proceeds to hiss at annoying drunk guy. Yeah, me too, sister. After the girl that Shane brought home passes out, Shane moves over to the hissing lady in an attempt to initiate a, group activity. You know, Monopoly. And as the camera pans down, you can see that she'd quite clearly benefit from the use of a pumice stone for her feet on account of them suddenly looking all demonic. But being too drunk to realise or care, Clint gets pulled into her face as she demonstrates for him her awesome new zombie impression that she's been practicing, which really seems to get Clint into the mood, as he's the type of guy who likes a girl who could eat him too. Clint then runs to the bathroom to compose himself, and probably spit in the sink a few more times, because screw that sink in particular, when suddenly Patrick barges into the bathroom as she's given him a danger hickey on his hand. Confused, they leave to confront her about it, but she turns around screaming at them with a split down her forehead as well as sharp fangs protruding from her mouth. To each their own. I'm not here to kink shame. She then slices at Shane with her claws, before burying her teeth into his neck for the second forbidden hickey of the night. And apparently, violent situations cause Patrick to get overly excited and remove his underpants, as he then runs into the bathroom completely naked, despite clearly wearing boxers a matter of seconds ago. You know what? You do you, man. After poking their heads out of the door, we can see that the woman is obliging Shane's foot fetish as she's on top of him with her foot over his mouth before she jumps off the bed, carrying his body with ease. Those must have been some mushrooms. Armed with a shower railing and Patrick's flaccid flappy bit hanging out, they exit the bathroom to find her practicing her yoga poses. Patrick attacks her, but she grabs the shower pole and pounces onto him, causing him to scream out in pain as she begins to devour him. Clint just manages to get out of the room and begins sprinting down the walkway, but ends up slipping down the stairs and breaks his wrist. He looks up to see the woman watching him from the staircase, before she then crawls right up to him, as we can see that her face is even more separated, because apparently that's a thing that happens to her when she gets excited. Once again, she tells him that she likes him, before then attempting to perform fellatio on the man with the broken wrist, keyword being attempt. Clint, struggling to get it up on account of the whole brutally massacred friends thing, watches as she appears to be embarrassed and begins to cry after realizing that Clint really isn't into the whole let's murder your friends and bang thing. After Clint manages to leave with not just his limp wrist, her embarrassment turns into anger as Clint runs towards some local residents for help, but is suddenly thrusted up into the air by the woman who has now sprouted wings, and suddenly the glasses drop from the skies above and land on the streets below. And if Amateur Night seems familiar to you, in 2016 it was adapted into a feature-length movie called Siren. I haven't seen it, but something tells me that it's got something to do with a chick whose head splits down the middle or something. And as the tape ends, we see, thanks to the criminals who were kind enough to document themselves committing a burglary, a man enters the room to discover that the guy who sat down in front of the rotting geriatric has gone missing. So after heading down into the basement, for a brief but apparent non-concerning run-in with a large unclothed man, decides to head back upstairs, put another tape in, and record his face a few years before reaction channels became a thing on YouTube. Tape number 2 is called Second Honeymoon and is directed by T. West, that follows the newlywed couple, Sam and Stephanie, as they record their road trip to Arizona, as well as a rather messy attempt to consummate a marriage, which involves a lot of sticky wet fluids. The tape begins with Stephanie talking into the camera, are about to go on a road trip and that they're going to capture all of their mementos and memories. It plays out in a very traditional family home video style at first, with just a bunch of random shots filming the open road and local town attractions, with one of those attractions being an automated fortune teller machine that for $1 gives them a card, and in a rather sinister moment of foreshadowing, tells them that there's going to be a happy reunion with a loved one that will make life all that they ever wanted, as well as saying that you have a very trusting nature and are easily taken in by so-called friends. Which I'm sure totally isn't hinting at anything that's going to happen later. They rent a room for the night, and after Sam repeatedly attempts and fails to get Stephanie to undress on camera, despite her saying no multiple times, they're interrupted by a sudden and loud knock at the door because apparently someone really doesn't like naked women. It then cuts to Sam, explaining that it was a girl who knocked on the door and that she was asking if they could give her a ride, and he tells the camera that there was just something off about her. While not feeling physically intimidated by the girl, apparently her presence alone was enough to make him feel uncomfortable. Later that night, the couple's camera suddenly turns on, but we see that both Sam and Stephanie are both sound asleep in their beds. Separate beds, because girls have cooties. After filming Sam sleeping, the mystery person begins to caress a sleeping Stephanie with a knife because apparently they're just a really big weirdo like that, before then deciding to make their way over to Sam's wallet and steal all of the cash inside. And after deciding that stealing all of his cash just wouldn't be fun enough, they then proceed to dunk his toothbrush in the toilet before putting it right back where they found it for the little turd-filled cherry on top. The next morning, we then see Sam ignorantly brushing his teeth with the flavour of someone else's ass water masked by the mint before the couple head off to visit the Grand Canyon. But the only thing that's grand about it is the theft, as Sam discovers that his money is missing. He seems upset and blames Stephanie for it, before then suddenly seeming happy as we see someone filming them with the view of the Grand Canyon at their backs. Because nothing's gonna make you forget about having all of your money stolen quite like a bunch of rocks. Later that night, back at the motel room, with Sam craving the taste of some more poop water, he suggests that they split up their trip and to head to Vegas, because apparently he's feeling lucky. Followed by him immediately not being lucky, as someone turns on the camera as he sleeps and thrusts a knife into his throat before leaving him to drown in his own blood. What a lucky guy. We then see the killer cleaning their hands in the bathroom, before then turning to a surprisingly unalarmed Stephanie after just witnessing her husband's inside juices make their way to the outsides, before the pair begin to swap saliva, because nothing gets the gears going quite like severing a man's windpipe. Stephanie was right, she would certainly be capturing all of their mementos, and there definitely was a reunion with a loved one by the looks of it, although I do question their definition of a happy reunion. As the tape finishes, it cuts back to the man watching, shocked and confused about what he's just witnessed. Like, did that dude just really use the poop toothbrush? But rather ominously, the dead body is no longer sitting behind him, and he hasn't realised. And with him apparently being quite the fan of homemade snuff, the next tape begins to play. Tuesday the 17th, directed by Glenn McQuaid, because I guess Thursday the 14th was taken or something. The third tape begins with a group of friends, Joey, Spider, Samantha, and new to the friend group Wendy, on their way to visit a lake that apparently Wendy visits every year alone, which is totally not serial killer behavior. And on the drive up, they each discover that they were invited individually for Wendy to then go behind their backs and invite the others anyway, which is still totally not serial killer behavior. After arriving, the second most horrifying thing to happen is Joey eating this bug, only second to his t-shirt that really needs to be ironed. And as they begin walking through the woods, weird things begin happening as Joey films the area. And by weird things, I mean dead people keep appearing in the footage. Wendy has Joey film a shot of a wall, only for the camera to glitch and reveal a shot of a dead woman laying against it. The same exact thing happens again, except instead of a dead woman up against a wall, it's a naked dude face down in a stream, attempting to use his little worm as fish bait. They all then proceed to get a little too intimate with a tree for some reason, before Wendy turns to Joey and tells him that they're all going to die up here, which does now seem to be bordering on serial killer behavior, to be honest. Not really helped by the fact that when they all sit down by the lake, Wendy proceeds to joke with them all, telling them about a group of friends that were viciously killed up here in the past. But Joey decides to lighten the mood by showing off his 1-inch wonder as he strips down and jumps into the lake before pretending to drown. What a good group of friends, telling each other that they're going to die and pretending to horrifically drown in front of them. Good old-fashioned wholesome fun. Spider and Samantha then head off deeper into the woods so she can pee, because I guess she just needs to hold someone's hand while she does it or something, when all of a sudden, something or someone, obscured by glitching pixels, launches a knife into the back of her skull, causing her eyeball to hang out of its socket when it should really be in its socket. Spider takes off running, but after falling for the old horror trope of, well, literally falling, he has a knife repeatedly thrusted into his skull, as the camera just happened to generously land in a way that perfectly frames it all for the audience to see. Wendy then comes across the camera, and leaning into the whole serial killer vibe, she doesn't appear to be alarmed at all. She returns to Joey and tells him that the others have left and that she wants to sleep with him, but it would seem that the idea of coitus reminds Joey of brutally dying, as he suddenly realizes that Wendy wasn't joking about the killings earlier, as he recalls an article about the incident. So confronted, she tells him that she brought the group up here because she needed bait, and as she's telling that to him, once again the camera begins to glitch, and the obscured pixelated entity approaches Joey from behind and cuts open his neck. Wendy takes off running into the forest and lures the creature into a trap that she somehow had the chance to set with all of her friends here. And even if she didn't have all of her friends with her, then surely the creature would have been able to pick her off alone. Either way, the magically appearing trap doesn't seem to work, and the creature just keeps on coming. Next, she lures it into a bear trap, and for some reason decides that it's a good idea to walk close enough to get sliced by Mr. Pixelman. She runs off a little further into the woods, and decides that now is a good time to talk to the camera and say that if anyone ever watches this, then never come out into these woods, despite her quite literally coming out into the woods and bringing a group of people with her. Wendy then spots Joey walking aimlessly through the woods with the little known condition named "I have a giant hole in my neck" before he collapses to the floor and dies. The creature then begins to approach, and yet again manages to walk directly into one of Wendy's traps, as if this is an episode of Looney Tunes with Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner or something. The creature has a spike thrusted through its face, and as she thinks it's over, suddenly it begins to violently shake, before somehow appearing above and pouncing from a tree, before it makes a really obnoxious mess by taking Wendy to the ground and pulling her insides out all over the place. And as the tape comes to an end, it appears that the old man has come back from his midnight stroll, but the burglar watching the tape has now disappeared. Were they playing hide and seek or something? And as the final two burglars discover yet another one of their men has gone missing, they decide to do the exact same thing yet again and have one guy sit on the floor to watch a bunch of VHS tapes, accompanied by a rotting old dude in the corner, as the other heads off into the house to look around. Well, it worked well enough the last 3 times. Once again, another man sits down, hoping to find this creepy dead dude's treasure trove of naughty movies, and the 4th tape begins to play. The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger, directed by Joe Swanberg, the guy who played the bedwetter in the second Honeymoon tape. This one takes the concept of found footage and approaches it from a different angle, as it's entirely told through recorded video chat sessions, a few years before the likes of Unfriended and Host would do something similar. The tape begins by introducing us to Emily and her boyfriend James, a doctor in training, as Emily is complaining about a strange bump on her arm that she has no memory of getting, which seems to remind her of a similar incident that happened to her as a child. But with James being a few hundred miles away from her, instead of doing the smart thing and telling the love of his life to go get that strange lump checked out, he tells her to just leave it alone, which apparently gets her in the mood to remove all of her clothes. It then cuts to a different day as the couple are video chatting, and Emily is giving James a tour of her apartment. She then takes him to a location where she tells him that she's been hearing footsteps in the night, and instead of just immediately, burning it all to the ground, she tells him that she'll call him next time it happens. Which is exactly what happens next, as she calls him in the middle of the night and tells him that there's something outside of her door, and as the door handle moves on its own, Emily opens the door to reveal that there's nothing there. She then sits down in her bedroom while making the rookie mistake of not closing the door behind her. Always close the door behind you when there's a demonic tiptoer in your house. She tells James this isn't exactly new to her, as this type of thing also happened when she was 12 years old. When suddenly, a small child appears in the doorway behind her, runs into the room, and slams the door shut. And that's your cue to delete the entire apartment. But apparently not for Emily, as it then cuts to the next morning, as she's for some reason still inside the apartment that strangely isn't a flaming inferno. She discusses with James what exactly it is that they saw last night, and instead of saying demon child, James suggests that it was just a breeze. A breeze with 2 arms and 2 legs that looks suspiciously like a child. But okay, James. Come night, she once again calls James due to strange noises outside of her door, so armed with a pair of scissors, she goes to investigate. Although she'd have better luck being armed with a priest, to be honest. With the light not working in the living room, she resorts to using the camera flash to see the room, and see the room she indeed does. A room with a small child sitting on the floor that suddenly begins sprinting towards her. Just kick it really hard. And the next day, we see Emily attempting to cut the lump out of her arm, and it's not just a little cut either. Emily is digging around inside of her arm as if she's looking for treasure, but James manages to talk her out of the whole severe self-mutilation thing, and then it cuts to them at night again. Except this time, Emily's got a plan. She's going to close her eyes so she won't be scared, and is going to attempt to talk to the child. She closes her eyes, faces the laptop forwards, and opens the door. After being guided into the living room by James, the camera then pans to reveal multiple children, as it then suddenly cuts to Emily laying on the floor with all of the kids sitting around her. James suddenly gets up from his computer and walks right through the front door of Emily's apartment, meaning that he's either an incredibly fast runner or he's been in the building the whole time. He slices open her back, and after rummaging around her insides like a child opening their presents on Christmas Day, he pulls out what appears to be an undeveloped baby and says to the children, "So you're telling me this thing is part human, and how many more times are you going to do this?" Insinuating that apparently it's quite common for James to go rummaging around people's insides in search of babies, followed by him then saying that he'll need to make it look like an accident, before then cutting to another video chat session as Emily's face is bruised and her arm is in a sling. She tells James that after visiting a doctor highly recommended by his colleagues, his little demon children colleagues, she's been diagnosed as schizoaffective, which gives James the perfect excuse to explain away all of the recent strange happenings. The baby stealing. And as Emily is beaten and distraught, it cuts to James on video chat with another woman as she's complaining about the exact same strange bump on her arm that Emily had. The brutal cycle is continuing, because apparently James is quite the womanizer, stroke ghost fetus stealer. But according to my trusted source, otherwise known as Wikipedia, apparently they're aliens and not strange ghost kids. Fooled me. Back with Dumb and Dumber, we see that it's just dumb and, well, dumb, because not only is the dead body missing once again, but so is the guy who was watching the tapes, leaving one final burglar alone in the house. He returns to the room to discover them both gone, confused but not too alarmed, leading me to believe that it's quite common for his buddy to up and leave with a rotting corpse, for reasons YouTube won't allow me to talk about, before he suddenly hears something running across the house. And after investigating, he finds the decapitated remains of one of his friends, before seeing the dead man, being very much not dead, and standing directly in front of him. He backs up and falls down the stairs before being killed by the man, as it appears he's become some kind of zombie-like creature, or perhaps just some cranky old dude who really doesn't appreciate being woken from his nap. It then cuts to the 5th and final tape, because I guess there's no better way for an elderly zombie creature to relax and unwind after pretending to be asleep for an hour and a half. The 5th tape is called 10/31/98, directed by a trio of filmmakers known as Radio Silence. And as I'm sure you've guessed by the name of the tape, it takes place on Halloween night in the year 1998. That is, unless you live literally anywhere else but the United States and are wondering why there's suddenly 31 months all of a sudden. Tyler, dressed up as a bear with a hidden camera in, is meeting up with his buddies, Chad, Matt and Paul, as they're off to attend a Halloween party for the night. And after getting confused with the similar sounding street names, they arrive at what they think is the party. A party for silent invisible people apparently, because there's nobody there. After just assuming that they're early, they find an unlocked door and begin walking around the house. They joke about the flickering lights, making fun of the poor attempt to be spooky, when suddenly Tyler turns around to see a floating PNG of a ghost child standing at the bottom of the stairs. The other guys then enter the room, laughing about the hands that they've just seen coming out of the walls, claiming that these are actually some good Halloween decorations. And after hearing noises coming from upstairs and assuming that's just where the party is, they decide to head up and take a look. And after entering a room, Tyler spots the child again in the reflection of a mirror before the lights go out and the door slams shut behind him. Thinking that it's either his friends messing with him, or part of the Halloween party, he heads even further up the house as the friends can hear what sounds to be a kind of chanting coming from the attic. This party's starting to sound pretty cool. And after walking up there, they see a group of men performing some kind of ritual around a tied up woman. And unfortunately not the kinky kind of tied up, but they're performing an exorcism kind of tied up. The friends are suddenly noticed by the confused men, and as one of the men hits the woman and the friends attempt to intervene, people suddenly begun to be flung across the room, as it becomes incredibly clear to the friends that yes, they're in the wrong house. They just gatecrashed an exorcism. As they start sprinting their way out of the house, Tyler stops them all at the front door, and they turn around and head back for the captive woman, because Tyler's always wanted a pet demon chick. And after making it to the attic once again, one of the men attacks Tyler, but is suddenly thrown up into the ceiling, because apparently the force is strong with this one. As they cut the woman free and fight off the men, hands begin to emerge from the floor. They run as doors begin flying off their hinges, and handprints appear along the walls. They make it back to the front door, but it begins to morph and close right before their very eyes. More hands begin to emerge from the walls, and more pots and pans are launched around the kitchen than a single mother having a mental breakdown, as the men are forced down into the basement after the back door handle disappears. They just manage to break free from the basement, seconds before being captured by the rather fondly hands trying to cup a feel, and speed off in their car with the woman in the back seat. After the woman loses consciousness, the car suddenly stalls and she disappears. She screams at them from outside of the window, when suddenly they see her in front of the car and realise that the doors won't open. And if being screamed at by some random freaky lady wasn't enough, they realise that they've stopped right in the middle of the train tracks and there's a train hurtling right towards them. And in their last moments of frantic panic, they desperately try to free themselves from the car, but are ultimately forced to sit inside of their metal coffin as the train collides with the car, and the tape, as well as the movie, comes to an end. And that brings us to the end of the found footage horror anthology VHS, which is actually the first in a series of 3 other movies. 3 movies that I am actually yet to see, which could potentially make for some good videos if you guys wanted to see them. And before we bring this to an end, I just want to tell you guys that I am launching my YouTube membership program, which is quite similar to the Patreon, except you get other benefits like being able to post emojis and stuff. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And speaking of Patreon, let me just say a big thank you to all of my patrons for help making these videos happen every week. So a big thank you to Dom, Hunters263, Rebecca Pitts, A Dandy in Space, Martin Brannan, Natasha Twyman, Jarrett C. Bees, Pascal Mathis, Fighting the Pirates, Richard McGowan III, Macy J, Reese Harford, Chris, Michelle, Dennis, Wade Knott, Ashley L. Wintz, Christopher Butsky, Joshua Torres, Remy, Fire Goes Fast, Josh Brooks, Dyrene, Robert Zerweck, Dark Shiva, Josh Hannon, Billy Whitaker, Lonif, Jay Slows, Daniel Dickinson, Donnie Do Work, and G-Source. So once again, thank you so much to my patrons, and thank you to everyone else for watching.